My name is Tlalefang Lezi, and I'm an economist, student, and entrepreneur.
One of your findings is that the teachers in township and rural schools have poor content knowledge levels and poor accountability. Talk about poor content knowledge. How do our teachers compare internationally? And what about our principals?
Well, when we did a benchmarking using SACMEC data, what we found is that South African teachers were outperformed by peer sub-Saharan African teachers. And this was when we were controlling for socioeconomic status. So when we take our rural teachers and we compare them to, for instance, rural teachers in Kenya or in Malawi or in Mozambique, what we find is that our teachers rank bottom, which is quite concerning. What is also concerning is that South African teachers in some assessments have actually been outperformed by the top learners that they're supposed to be teaching. And this is obviously concerning for a number of reasons. For one, you can't teach that which you yourself don't understand. And secondly, how are teachers going to assess students when they don't really understand the content in depth? And we also have a challenge with the quality of the management in our schools. What we find is that essentially the principals and the teachers come from the same sort of training program. So our teachers also have low management skills. We find that they have low capacity, and so we find that really the quality of the management in our schools is also concerning. And what we find is that when we review some anecdotal cases, we find that the schools that have very good principals, even though they are in rural areas and whatsoever, they tend to ultimately have motivated teachers and better outcomes. So really, principals play a very, very key role, in leading the school as an institution, in motivating and encouraging and managing teachers. So it's quite concerning that most of the principals that we have, particularly in rural areas, have low capacity, low skills to execute their roles.
So low accountability and poor management overshadows poor content knowledge for learners from poor communities. Why is this?
This was actually one of the more interesting findings in our paper. So if you look at a rural area, you find a number of explanatory factors for why the quality of education is low. Some of them are environmental, and like we've pointed out, some of them have to do with low content knowledge. But when we review studies, what we find is that estimations show that the environment has a greater impact on learner outcome than teacher content does. And this is something that has been proven empirically. And it sort of makes sense, because even if you have a teacher who has outstanding content of the subject that they're supposed to be teaching, they can only go so far if there are all these environmental constraints, So if you don't have measures to hold teachers accountable, for instance, if we have poor management, or if we have socioeconomic constraints that limit the resources that learners can have, and all of these things, teacher content will only take you so far. So what matters over and above teacher content knowledge is the environment, having the right environmental setting that is conducive for proper teaching and learning.
So one of the statistics you quoted is in predominantly black schools, teachers teach an average of 3.5 hours a day, compared with an average of 6.5 hours a day in former white schools. You also talk about the problem of absenteeism, especially long weekends on Fridays and Mondays. One of the things that the paper points to is the role of unions. Can you tell us more about this?
This is somewhat a contentious issue in South Africa, because unions have what we find is that unions have a strong presence and a strong influence. And this is really a legacy issue again, because of the historical role that they played in resistance movements and all of that. But what we're finding is that in certain instances, unions have actually, shall I say, overprotected teachers, and they've resisted some measures that government could have implemented to try and drive and foster accountability.
So, what do you attribute to the recent improvement in secondary school education quality?
One key factor to mention here is how teacher training has since transformed since 1994. So what we're finding is that the newer cohort of teachers, the younger generation of teachers, exhibits better content knowledge than the older generation, that was trained during the pre-democratic era. So we're finding that the fresh and young teachers that we have understand their subjects better. We also find that they have better motivation. And so this is translating into learner outcomes. And this is what the Department of Basic Education also observes, that we're starting to see an improvement in secondary education, particularly in international measures such as pearls and terms. And really, I think the fact that we've transformed the way we're training the younger cohort of teachers has to do a lot with that.
Is it too little too late, or are we on the right track?
I think we're on the right track. It's just that the question is, given the scale of the problem and the bright sparks, how fast will we get there? Because this really has been one of South Africa's biggest hindrances to the promises of democracy since 1994. So there are these bright sparks, such as the younger cohort of teachers that we're seeing. But given the gravity of the situation, the urgency of the situation, we should be doing more and we should be doing it quicker.